Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Implementing HUD's Equal Access and Gender Identity Rule. My name is Michelle Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kings Tulare Homeless Alliance. And with me today is Leticia Hinosa, our Coordinated Entry Manager, also with the Kings Tulare Homeless Alliance. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToMeeting control panel. We will bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have time for discussions throughout the presentation and questions at the end. So for today's discussion, please turn your cell phones off if not on call and put them away. Close email and other programs. This presentation will last about 60 minutes with question and discussion breaks, as I mentioned before. To submit questions, again, use the chat box at the bottom of the GoToMeeting window. If you have trouble with that, we will also unmute the call and have time for people to comment verbally. Because this is a webinar, right now attendees are muted. Please type in any questions you have in the chat box, and we are recording this webinar, and the PowerPoint will be distributed later. The agenda today, we will be discussing the Equal Access Rule. We will review gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. We will discuss specific scenarios at projects such as emergency shelters, transitional housing, and permanent supportive projects. We will also review resources to help you implement this rule in your own program. The importance of these rules, the actual requirements, and the steps necessary to strengthen projects as they provide services to households in need is the primary objective of the training today. We are also trying to better understand the communities we are trying to serve, so we will be sharing one family's recent experience. As many of you know, HUD's Equal Access and Gender Identity Rules became effective October 21st, 2016. It is required in all HUD assistance programs, and individuals are placed in accordance with gender identity. There are no requirements for individuals to prove gender identity, and providers must update policies and procedures to reflect HUD's equal access requirements. Coordinated entry is about working as a community to serve the people who need our help the most. This rule is another aspect of these principles. We are very simply saying that people must be served based on their gender identity, the gender they know themselves to be. And we're not going to force them to prove their gender identity in any number of ways that make people feel demeaned, rejected, threatened, or less than. The reality is that transgender folks are twice as likely to become homeless as their non-transgender counterparts. That fact alone tells us how critical this work is. And once they're homeless, we know from the research that they're not getting served correctly. They are turned away or placed inappropriately the majority of the time. And if they are served, over a quarter of people experience harassment and assault within shelters, both by other residents and staff or volunteers. The 2012 Equal Access Rule said pretty simply that equal access must be given in HUD-funded programs regardless of sexual orientation, marital status, or gender identity. That's been in effect for over 4 years now, but there were some areas that needed further requirements for projects. The definition of family remains the same. The Equal Access Rule defines family as follows. Family includes, but is not limited to, regardless of marital status, actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity, the following. A single person who may be an elderly person, displaced person, disabled person, nearly elderly person, or any other single person, or a group of persons residing together, and such group includes, but is not limited to, a family with or without children. A child who is temporarily away from the home because of placement in foster care is considered a member of the family. An elderly family, a nearly elderly family, a disabled family, a displaced family, and the remaining member of a tenant family. What this means is that any group of people that present together for assistance and identify themselves as a family, regardless of age or relationship or other factors, are considered to be a family and must be served together as such. Further, a recipient or subrecipient receiving funds under the ESG or COC programs cannot discriminate against a group of people presenting as a family based on the composition of the family. For example, adults and children, or just adults, the age of any member's family, the disability status of any members of the family, marital status, actual or perceived sexual orientation, or gender identity. We specifically needed to nail down the policy on how transgender people were to be placed and served in single-sex projects. Projects must place, serve, and accommodate people in accordance with their gender identity, and that questioning about anatomy or other evidence of one's gender identity is not allowed. It's important to understand why that's not allowed, and there are two main reasons. First, we all know that people experiencing homelessness do not have access to a lot of resources. That same is true for transgender people experiencing homelessness. That means hormones, surgeries, and other modifications that people might make to their appearance may not actually be available, and that includes having identification documents that reflect that person's gender identity. Depending on the state, it can be very difficult to get IDs updated, so using that as a verification creates a barrier for those folks. The other reason that intrusive questioning or asking for anatomical or physical information is that staff may have assumptions about what a transgender person should look like or what a woman or man should look like, and those assumptions may differ from the person's appearance. That doesn't mean the person's appearance is wrong or bad. When projects make questions like these a condition of entry to the project, it creates an often insurmountable barrier for these clients. Finally, there is an additional requirement that projects take non-discriminatory steps to address clients' privacy concerns. The important thing to note here is that steps are taken when a client raises concerns, and not that a project treats transgender people differently as a policy. The easiest example of this is when a project has a policy of putting all transgender clients in a separate room from everyone else. That isolates and segregates people because of their transgender status. Instead, projects must provide equal access to all clients and only take measures to address privacy concerns when a client raises a concern. This is part of good person-centered care and low barrier principles. And now it's also a requirement in the amended rule. So what you see on your screen goes over the requirements of gender identity rule. As we can read on the screen, it was published in September 21st, became effective October 21st, 2016. It requires that policies and procedures to protect privacy, health, safety, and security shall be established or amended as necessary and administered in a non-discriminatory manner to ensure that equal access to all CPD programs is provided in accordance with gender identity. In single-sex facilities, individuals are placed, served, and accommodated in accordance with one's gender identity, and individuals are not subjected to intrusive questioning or asked to provide anatomical information or documentary, physical, or medical evidence of the individual's gender identity. Plus, non-discriminatory steps must be taken to address privacy concerns, including updating operating policies and procedures. So you might be asking yourself, is my project required to comply with the Equal Access Rule? The answer is if you get funding from any of those sources, CDBG, HOME, COC, ESG, HOPWA, Housing Trust Fund, or Rural Housing, the answer is yes. It doesn't matter how much or how little funding you get. That includes temporary disaster shelters if you receive CDBG money. It has to be current funding, so maybe you used CDBG funds 20 years ago to fund some bricks and mortar. That doesn't necessarily qualify you, but if you receive any funds currently, even mid-grant cycle, you have to be compliant with the rule. Although it's not a HUD program, VAWA also has equal access requirements that were issued in 2014. HUD's new rule will require a recipient, subrecipient, or provider to establish, amend, or maintain program admissions, occupancy, and operating policies and procedures, including policies and procedures to protect individuals' privacy and security, so that equal access is provided to individuals based on their gender identity. As a new program regulation, failure to comply with the requirements of this rule will be considered violation of program requirements and will subject the non-compliant grantee to all sanctions and penalties available for program requirement violations. So we'd like to share with you the VAWA Reauthorization Act of 2013. It was issued and became effective April 9, 2014. VAWA 2013 imposes a new grant condition that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity by recipients of such grants. The FAQ also addresses how a recipient of DOJ funds can operate a single-sex facility funded through VAWA and not discriminate on the basis of gender identity. We encourage you to visit the FAQs for this Reauthorization Act to learn more about the VAWA requirements. So right now we'd like to unmute the volume so that if any participants have questions, we can answer those. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to go on. I will be passing on the presentation to Leticia now to talk about using appropriate terms and language.
Hi, so some appropriate terms and language for the LGBTQ new rule. The first one is gender identity. So internal or innate sense of being male, female, or another gender. It may or may not match their assigned sex at birth. Another term is gender expression. External expression of gender identity. Note that many times people do not feel they can safely express their gender identity. It's exhibited through behavior, clothing, hairstyle, body language, and voice. Also sexual orientation, physical or emotional attraction to the same and or opposite sex, distinct from one's gender expression or identity. Some more appropriate terms. Transgender, so umbrella term for people whose gender identity is different from their assigned sex. Occasionally, an individual may determine they no longer identify as transgender after they transition. Also, transitional or gender transition, a process that some, but not all, transgender people go through to begin living as a gender with which they identify, rather than the sex assigned to them at birth. It does not require medical treatment. Sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression are three different concepts, though we often put them together or confuse one for the other. Transgender individuals face a lot of choice when they are determining how to express their identity. Changes in expression can happen at an early age or later in the life course. This change in gender expression may or may not include a change in name, change in preferred gender pronouns such as him or her, and hormones or surgery. To create a more welcoming environment for the transgender population, avoid invasive and unnecessary questions that are not relevant to treatment. Also, if you don't know, ask about preferred name, pronouns, and names for body parts. Many people use one or more of the following pronouns. He, him, his are pronouns for male or masculine identities. She, her, hers are pronouns for female or feminine identities, and they, them, their are inclusive pronouns associated with gender non-conforming, non-binary identities and all other gender identities. Clients may choose to disclose their transgender status at some projects within a community while not disclosing at other projects. For instance, a client may want to disclose their transgender status at a health clinic to receive appropriate health care, but not at a project where one's sex assigned at birth is not relevant to the services provided. So right now, we're going to show you a 7-minute video with more terminology. Hey everyone, well, from chairs to desks and everything in between. It can be hard to dissect what it all means. So this brief video will introduce you to some basic concepts. Okay, there's a lot to get through. First, the LGBTQ plus acronym. Let's break that down. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, ally. Now, all of these words deal with one of 4 key traits every person, queer or not, has. Biological sex is the physical anatomy with which you were born. Gender identity is the personal feeling and conceptualization of one's own gender on the spectrum between male and female. Sexual orientation is the gender to which a person is attracted, either romantically or sexually, in relation to their own. Gender expression is how a person chooses to outwardly show their gender identity. In simple terms, biological sex, what you have, gender identity, what you feel, sexual orientation, who you love, gender expression, how you look at it. Okay, we just broke down the acronym and we talked about the 4 traits. Now let's put them together. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and asexual refer to sexual orientation. Intersex refers to differences in biological sex, which can also be related to being transgender, and both of those are related to gender identity. Queer is an umbrella term used by most of the community to refer to anyone who identifies as part of the community. Questioning refers to people who are, you guessed it, still questioning their sexuality or gender. Allies are non-queer folks who support and love the queer community. Now, the first idea to talk about is that of the spectrum. The LGBTQ plus community widely accepts that the 4 aforementioned traits are all on a spectrum, a scale between 2 opposite points. Traits can fall on either extreme or anywhere in between. All right, let's jump in and start with terms relating to gender identity. First, biological sex. The extremes on this spectrum are biological male and female. These are determined mainly by hormones and organs. For males, this means testosterone, a penis, testes, and secondary sex characteristics like body and facial hair and a lower voice. For females, this means estrogen, a vagina, and the internal reproductive organs for pregnancy. Female secondary sex characteristics include breasts, wider hips, and higher voice. Intersex is the term used to describe people whose combination of hormones, internal sex organs, and genitals do not fit typical binary notions of male or female body. Gender, another spectrum, is the scale between boy and girl. Boys may use masculine pronouns, he and his, and feel masculine. Girls use she, her, her pronouns and feel feminine. Anyone who identifies outside the gender binary falls under the umbrella term of genderqueer. Halfway between the extremes is gender neutral. This means someone who identifies as neither a man nor a woman. They often choose neutral pronouns, they, them, their, or a variation of the invented pronouns, these, or these. Someone who is gender fluid may identify differently at different times. A bigender person lives their life at both extremes at different times, moving both as a man and as a woman. With both gender fluid and bigender people, it is important to listen and respect the appropriate pronoun for the situation. Agender people don't identify with any gender and often use gender-neutral pronouns. So, we already established that gender identity is the gender you feel inside. When your internal gender identity matches your born biological sex, that's called cisgender. If they don't match, transgender. Transgender people experience gender dysphoria.
or the uncomfortable feeling that their mind and body don't match. Often, trans people will choose to transition, using hormone replacement therapy and/or various surgeries to change their bodies to match their identity. It is never okay to ask a trans person where they are in their transition. If they want you to know, they'll tell you. Mind-body alignment also lies on a spectrum. Gender expression is how people choose to show their gender to the outside world. This refers to the ways in which we each manifest masculinity or femininity. It is usually an extension of gender identity. Each of us expresses a particular gender every day. The clothes we wear, how we style our hair, or even the way we stand. Drag kings and queens are people who explore gender as an art form. Their cross-dressing is a form of gender expression, but you cannot assume anything about their gender identity or sexual orientation based on how they choose to dress. Speaking of sexual orientation, that's our last spectrum, and it refers to whom you are attracted. On one end, we have heterosexual, or attraction to someone of the opposite gender. Opposingly, there is homosexual, or attraction to the same gender. In between is bisexual, attraction to both genders. Pansexuality is attraction to all genders, including those that lay outside the binary. Someone who is asexual is not attracted to any gender. Attraction can be broken down even further into both romantic and sexual. One is an emotional attraction, the other is physical. These attractions do not always have to align. For example, someone can be panromantic, emotionally attracted to all genders, but asexual, not physically attracted to any gender. There are several other more nuanced prefixes: demi, scolio, poly, to name a few. Other genders such as third gender and two-spirit also exist. Some of these identities can be confusing and hard to understand if you've never been exposed to them before. But if a person defines themselves in a way that is new to you, it is okay, even important, to respectfully ask what that identity means to them. These are just a few of some offensive and hurtful terms that are used to describe some people in the LGBT community. These terms are mostly old-fashioned and are often used out of ignorance rather than malice. However, they can all be slurs used maliciously on purpose to hurt people's feelings. But the biggest message you should take away from this video is the importance of letting someone define their own gender and sexuality. Respect their pronouns, respect their chosen name, respect their appearance, and respect their choice in partner. Share this video on your favorite social media platform and spread the word. Use these new vocab words to define yourself. I am a gay, cisgender female. Who are you? Hey everyone, welcome to this super neat introduction to some concepts.
We hope we were all able to hear that. We realize some of you are on the phone and others are actually on the web. We will definitely have this PowerPoint with all the links sent out to everyone who is on this listserv. But we'd like to open up the discussion for everyone. Are these terms new to you? Have you used this language in your project or setting? Yes. These are very familiar terms that I use regularly. Yes, there are terms I've heard before but don't use regular, or no, these are new terms. So we'd like to open up the discussion. And we have also unmuted.
They're all new terms to me, some of them.
And who's speaking?
Becky from Salvation Army.
Hi. What did you think about the video?
Was okay. I forgot half of it already because they were so new and it was moving a little faster for me to read some of it. So.
Yeah, we'll definitely send it out. I found it very informative and helpful to have context about folks that may have a scenario that's different from what we experience on a day-to-day basis. Any other thoughts out there? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and mute folks again and move on to the next section of our presentation.
And for some more information, as well as some more basic terms, you can click on the link, and I'll click on it so that we all know what it looks like. And again, we'll show these links to everyone once we send out the PowerPoint, but here are some more terms. Okay. And now I'd like to turn it over to Michelle for our first scenario.
Okay, so we thought it would be helpful to share with you all some scenarios that similar to what you may or may not have experienced, but these have happened in other communities. So here's scenario number 1. I run a 50-bed emergency shelter for men. My project is housed in an old firehouse and only has congregate sleeping and bathroom facilities with no privacy for any clients. One of the men staying in the shelter comes to a volunteer staff person and identifies as transgender. Do I allow them to continue using the same facilities as other clients? So not only can you allow it, but you are required to do so. Do not isolate clients based on their transgender status. Address the question of risk to clients. Trans clients are much more likely to be victims of assault than the perpetrators. They're the ones most at risk. A client may request an accommodation, in this case, perhaps requesting a bed assignment near the staff workstation or access to space set aside for highly vulnerable clients. However, staff may not impose or require a client to accept an accommodation. Treat all clients that are eligible, in this case, anyone identifying as male, with the same services, staff, questions, and setting that all other clients receive. Additional point regarding bathrooms, you can create privacy through time or space. If someone requests additional privacy, whether they're transgender or not, projects can create privacy through use of shower schedules. Putting up curtains at a bare minimum across toilet stalls can also provide an additional layer of privacy. As part of the new requirements, projects have to take non-discriminatory steps to address clients' privacy concerns. The important thing to note here is that steps are taken when a client raises concerns, and not that a project treats transgender people differently as a policy. The easiest example of this is when a project has a policy of putting all transgender clients in a separate room from everyone else. That isolates and segregates people because of their transgender status. Instead, projects must provide equal access to all clients and only take measures to address privacy concerns when a client raises a concern. This is part of good person-centered care and low barrier principles, and now it's also a requirement in the amended rule. Again, we encourage you to use the links we have included throughout the session to help you work through these policies and procedure decisions and implementation. So I'm going to share with you another scenario, and this is about a domestic violence shelter. I run a domestic violence project that serves women. We house residents in 2 separate buildings on the same property. All residents have access to the same services, but I've decided to house trans women in one building and women in the other. I did this because I'm worried about triggering traumatic experiences for residents of the project as they begin to rebuild their lives. Can I require all trans women be served in a different building or project? To address this question, let's consider trans clients are also highly vulnerable. We cannot control what triggers people. Operating a federally funded project in a discriminatory way is not a sustainable model. Intimate partner and family violence projects already know that aggressors and victims can be of any age or gender. Perpetrators can be adult children being violent with parents, same-sex partners using violence, or any combination of the diversity in a community. Federally funded projects that are designed to serve women who are victims of domestic violence must serve all women. If a project serves families that are victims of domestic violence, then they must serve all families. It is important to regularly educate staff, volunteers, and residents about respect and equal treatment of LGBT individuals. Take violence against LGBT residents seriously. Document the violation and respond immediately. Enforce non-discrimination rules consistently to establish safe space for LGBT residents. Immediately investigate allegations of violence or harassment of LGBT individuals in the shelter. Identify the perpetrator or perpetrators, and enforce the shelter's non-discrimination rules. Why are LGBT protections necessary? Among homeless LGBT youth up to age 24, the average age of being homeless the first time is 15 years. Nearly 2/3 of homeless shelters in a study failed to enroll a person properly once they identified as transgender. Nearly 1/4 of homeless transgender residents report being assaulted by other residents or staff at homeless shelters. So we're going to watch a short video by Truth, a collaboration between Transgender Law Center and GSA Network. The video aims to build empathy, understanding, and a movement for youth to share their stories in their own words and their own way.
My name is George Funkelberger, and I'm in 6th grade, and I go to Avalon. I would describe myself as majestic, fabulous, and sparkly.
George is an interesting kid, and both my kids are. George has a lot of energy and a lot of passion about the things that he likes. When we first discovered that George was transgender, then there's a period of adjustment, and that's normal.
A lot of people think like, oh, if you're trans, and you identify as a male, then you're going to act very masculine because that's who you're supposed to be. I like how I don't really fit into any role that someone would usually do.
George and I were sitting together one day, and I was curious, and so I asked him, hey, do you ever miss being first name? And George said, no, I don't, Mom. And then he paused for a second, and then he said, do you ever miss having a daughter? And I said, no, I don't, because you're right here. Here you are, right here in front of me. And I don't care whether I call you daughter or son or anything in between. You're my kid. You're the same kid I've always loved. You're just a happier version. He had gone to the same school from kindergarten until he transitioned. So everyone had known him as his birth name. He had decided his 5th grade year that he was going to transition at school. That kid marched into his classroom and he said, you've all known me as, he gave his birth name, but in my head and in my heart, I'm a boy, and I'd appreciate it if you call me George from now on. And that was it. The kids were great. That's the thing, the kids are great. It's usually adults that seem to have more discomfort about people who are transgender or people who are different in general. Children, they got it down. There's so many different versions of being your genuine self out there. And I didn't know about it until I had George.
Good thing the world should know about my mom is that she's amazing.
Aww.
Okay, so what discrimination looks like? What does it look like in emergency shelters?
My name is Holly Mossmayer. I'm 16 years old and I'm transgender. I don't like school.
Sorry about that. We are having a little bit of technical difficulty. We will be pulling up the right slide in just a moment. Okay, sorry about that. What discrimination looks like in emergency shelters? A shelter employee hanging up immediately after a caller reveals she is transgender. A shelter employee making references to genitalia or to a surgery as a requirement for appropriate housing. A shelter employee refusing to enroll a participant because they would make other participants uncomfortable or feel unsafe. What does it look like in transitional, permanent, supportive, or other housing? Management of housing projects or facilities failing to address complaints from LGBT individuals regarding harassment by other residents. Project staff revealing an individual's status as transgender and requiring special procedures for households with transgender person. Project staff excluding individuals based on family composition. Again, we refer you to the Equal Access Rule that clearly defines what a family is, and the COC program and ESG program interim rules prohibit involuntary family separation. The behaviors listed here are additional common discriminatory responses to lesbian, gay, and bisexual clients, transgender clients, and families of particular compositions. The most frequently discriminated against families are those with male members who are separated from their family within a facility or prohibited altogether from being served with their family. So we're going to open it up right now for discussion to just get your feedback on have any of these issues come up in your project or in your specific community? Do you think these issues have come up but they are not managed well, or that these issues are coming up and they are managed in accordance with the Equal Access Rule? Anyone have any experience, concerns, or comments they would like to share at this point? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to the next slide in our presentation. So we're going to talk in scenario 3 about non-binary identity. The scenario states at my woman's shelter, where everyone sleeps in a room with 3 roommates, a person is referred to the project by an outreach worker. We don't have any extra space to house trans clients. When they arrive, the individual refuses to pick male or female and says they don't identify with either. What should I do? The first response, A, ask the client, we serve women at this project. Do you feel your gender identity more closely aligns with the housing and services we offer? If so, enroll the client. HUD does not require project participants to select male or female. In fact, the HMIS data element 3.6 for gender allows for multiple gender categories, including transgender, and doesn't identify as male, female, or transgender. Extra space isn't necessary to serve transgender or non-binary clients seeking services. Serving those clients is part of what HUD-funded services do as a part of their usual work, not as an added. A direct quote from Gender Identity Rule Preamble. In circumstances where an individual does not identify as male or female, and such information is relevant to placement and accommodation, the individual should be asked the gender with which the individual most closely identifies. In these circumstances, the individual is in the best position to specify the more appropriate gender-based placement, as well as the placement that is most likely to be the safest for the individual, either placement with males or placement with females. So for more information on these specific concepts, we encourage you to visit the Understanding Non-Binary People, How to Be Respectful and Supportive, and we have the link here. Again, that will be available in our presentation that we disseminate. I'm going to unmute the call again in the event that there are any questions or concerns about this topic. All callers have been unmuted. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Leticia to take over the next section of our presentation.
And it's important to create a safe space in your facility or your agency. And it's important to think about some of these questions. People may ask the following when walking into your space. Is this a place where I can be myself, or will I have to hide who I am? Is this a place where I will experience violence from people around me, employees, volunteers, or other residents? Will the people who work here understand what I need? Am I safe enough here to stay off the streets tonight? Talk to all residents about what transgender means, what it feels like to be disrespected, drawing parallels to other people's experiences, and treating all residents with respect. Train all staff and volunteers, model respectful behavior and appropriate language, post signage about non-discrimination policies, provide affirming resources and pamphlets, and create connections in the broader community, the LGBT centers, supportive landlords, etc. Here are some ways you can create a safe place for access to showers and bathrooms. Access is based on gender identities. Increase privacy when possible by installing temporary or permanent curtains, installing locks, doors, or partitions to toilet stalls. Single-use facilities are gender neutral, meaning anyone can use them. Increase privacy through staggered shower times for those who request more privacy. You can create a safe space through conflict resolution. Some of the advice here is don't target the more cooperative harassed individuals to make changes. Focus on the aggressor. Staff training should incorporate multiple ways to address and resolve impermissible conduct among residents. Conflict resolution should not involve expulsion of the victim of harassment. A few other things to keep in mind: ignore bullying, including verbal bullying against LGBT clients. Don't ignore bullying, including verbal bullying against LGBT clients, or sweep these incidents under the rug, even if you think the bullying is harmless. Consistent enforcement of non-discrimination rules is important for purposes of compliance and education. Don't force transgender residents to appear as their sex assigned at birth, or suggest that they should do so to fit in for their safety. Don't victim blame, punish, exclude, or banish the person being abused or bullied. Don't assume LGBT individuals are already educated about LGBT non-discrimination, and don't assume an LGBT individual are comfortable with all other LGBT individuals. Again, we want to reiterate to make room for families, which include families of any composition and type. So making room for all families. So when projects serve any families with children, they must serve all families with children. That includes families of any composition type: single dad, single mom, same-sex couples, opposite-sex couples, multi-generational, and non-romantic groups who present for services as a family. And for more information, you can visit the definition of family in the HUD Exchange link. So we want to recap the safe spaces for non-binary clients in single-sex facilities. Some clients may not identify themselves as either male or female, but most shelters assign housing and programming based on two genders only, male and female. How should project staff resolve? You could explain the shelter's decision are based on two genders only. Ask the client to choose the gender which they most closely identify, and make decisions for placement that are appropriate to the gender selected by the individual. Here are some next steps to think about. Does your agency have an anti-discrimination policy? Is it posted publicly? You can get a notice of rights here at this link for the notice on equal access rights. You can also get an LGBT flyer through HUD at that link. We encourage you to print and hang the notice of rights in your agency so that everyone knows their rights and how to report complaints. The Equal Access Self-Assessment Tool is a central clearinghouse, and that link is also on the bottom. It's a resource for the LGBT community and providers working within the LGBT community, including information on and links to HUD's Equal Access Rule and program guidance, a toolkit on supporting transgender inclusive projects, information on HUD's initiative for community-wide prevention of LGBT youth homelessness, and links to LGBTQ resources and research reports. A few other links: ask for help, reach out to your local LGBTQ advocacy organizations such as The Source, LGBT Plus Center, PFLAG, Tulare and Kings counties, and the Visalia Pride Lions Club. And a few other links for statewide LGBTQ advocacy organizations. You can look at the equalfederation.org link, as well as the state and local fair housing enforcement, and visit HUD Exchange LGBT homeless resource page. If you think your rights have been violated, the Housing Discrimination Complaint Form is available for you to download at the link provided. Complete and return, or complete online and submit, or you may write HUD a letter or telephone the HUD office nearest to you. You have 1 year after an alleged violation to file a complaint with HUD, but you should file it as soon as possible.
So we are now going to talk about very quickly employment regulations. We are just about finished with our webinar, but it's also important not only for the clients that we serve, but for the employees that we have at our programs. So the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, established the following employer liability for harassment. An employer is automatically liable for harassment by a supervisor that results in a negative employment action, such as termination, failure to promote or hire, and loss of wages. If the supervisor's harassment results in a hostile work environment, the employer can avoid liability only if it can prove that it has reasonably tried to prevent and promptly correct the harassing behavior, the employee unreasonably failed to take advantage of any preventative or corrective opportunities provided by the employer will be liable for harassment by non-supervisory employees or non-employees over whom it has control. Example, independent contractors or customers on the premises, if it knew or should have known about the harassment and failed to take prompt and appropriate corrective action. So these would be scenarios that it could be even employee to employee, supervisor to employee, so on and so forth. EEOC harassment standards have established guidelines for employers regarding behaviors that create a hostile work environment and require correction. It is important to remember that homeless projects are also workplaces. As defined by the EEOC, harassment can include offensive jokes, slurs, epithets, or name-calling, physical assaults or threats, intimidation, ridicule, or mockery, insults or put-downs, offensive objects or pictures, and interference with work performance. Are there any questions or items that you would like to discuss? I have unmuted the call. Joey,
hi, Michelle.
Oh, yes.
This is Maria from CSET. I do have a question. So we have some shelters that are exclusive for women and some that are exclusive for men. And so whenever we get, we're dealing with the clients that we're serving, and if prior to them getting housed, we have someone that identifies themselves, let's say they're males, but they identify themselves as a female, and we provide them the information for the women's shelters. So in everything that you covered, is this telling us that these shelters that are exclusive for women would then be required to take in those who identify them as women, identify themselves as a female?
So if the shelter is government funded through the funding streams that we talked about earlier in the presentation, then yes. If they are not government funded through those funding streams, then no. So for example, a faith-based shelter there's a strong likelihood that they are not funded through CDBG, Home, COC, ESG, HOPWA, Housing Trust Fund, or Rural Housing, and therefore would not be subject to complying with this guidance.
So then is our responsibility, regardless of the fact, and I think they are a faith-based organization, so regardless of the fact that we know this particular agency doesn't respect us, are we still obligated to provide them with the women's shelters if that is how they identify themselves? Or should we, knowing that this may be an issue, provide them with the men's shelters? I mean, just being sensitive to, who they identify as.
My recommendation, if they ask, if you were asked who they, what gender they most closely identify with, they provide you with a gender, you could certainly make that referral. If that referral is not received by an emergency shelter that does not have to comply with the equal access rule, we do have government-funded shelters in the community. There is one in Porterville, Central California Family Crisis Center, and there is one in Hanford, Barbara Seville's Women's Shelter, and they both would be able to assist in that regard.
But we should go ahead and refer them to whatever gender they identify as.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? And I do have a comment from Joey Cox. He had, through our chat session, he has indicated that when VAWA was reenacted, that he met with all of his staff and that the KCAO team has been following these rules since that reenaction, and his staff and team have been great in implementing these rules. So thank you, Joey, for being ahead of the game on this and making sure that your staff is up to speed on the requirements and supporting all persons in our community. Seeing that there are no other comments, we're going to go ahead and mute the call and just wrap up with a few links and then send you all on your way for the day. So as we close, we just wanted to point out or reiterate the HUD resources that are available to you. There is an equal access in accordance with gender identity final rule. That's the topic of today's webinar. So you can get that at the HUDexchange.info page. There are technical assistance materials to support the final rule implementation, and that would also be available on the HUDexchange.info website. HUD has also provided a document that grantees can publicly post to inform clients and staff of equal access, also available on the HUD Exchange website. And finally, there are LGBT resources on the HUD portal. Thank you for attending the Equal Access and Gender Identities Rules webinar. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Our primary goal was to increase your understanding of the new rule and to introduce and provide resources that will support your programs. We will be sending out the PowerPoint presentation to everyone on this listserv. Thank you again, and have a great day.